This service was the product of the Sevres factory and was quite beautiful. There was not a single piece that did not represent a city or an event connected with the glory of the empire. As can easily be seen, the governor, since his arrival, had made a point of imposing one restriction after another. He had succeeded, if not in locking up the emperor as he claimed to have the power to do, at least in depriving him from receiving anyone without his orders. He was not the kind of man to stop there. The frigate Eurotas had just dropped anchor in the bay, gave the emperor hope of some distraction thanks to the newspapers he would receive that Countess Casas would read to him. The news we wanted to hear was not always the news read, but it led to discussions and helped pass the time. The governor, whom the emperor had already refused to receive, came to Longwood on October 1st, the day following the arrival of the Eurotas. No matter how much he insisted on being admitted in order to communicate the new instructions he had just received, the emperor persisted in his refusal, saying he was ill. He believed that if the governor came in person, he was only bearing bad news. It was only too true. Giving up any attempt to communicate these instructions himself, Sir Hudson Lowe assigned to Sir Thomas Reed to take them to Longwood, and the emperor received them in the garden. The British officer approached him with the deference and seductive manners that disguise an evil soul. He informed him of Lord Bathurst's orders regarding the reduction of the personnel in the emperor's retinue and the need for 4 people to leave Longwood. When he returned indoors, the emperor said to Countess Casas, "Did I not tell you the other day that for him to come so promptly he must have had some well-sharpened dagger to plunge into my heart? Soon they will leave no one around me. I would prefer that you all leave than to see you tremble every instant at the constant threat of being thrown in a vessel and taken to the Cape solely on the whim of this executioner who is always ready to interpret his restrictions in his own manner. Let him place sentries at my windows. Let him feed me bread and water. My spirit is free, and I am as independent as when I commanded in Europe." The emperor was extremely upset, pacing back and forth in his bedroom. Everything in him showed his irritation had reached its peak. I was quite struck when I heard these words. I thought they were taking his officers away from him, but I soon learned that the designated people were Rousseau, Archambault, Santini, and Captain Piantovsky. This departure was not only felt by all of us, but left those who remained, fearing they might be removed by a similar order. A new declaration had to be signed by each of us, and the emperor wanted it worded in this fashion. I, the undersigned, declare that it is my wish to remain on the island of St. Helena and to share in the restrictions imposed on the Emperor Napoleon personally. A few hours after having been sent to Plantation House, the Grand Marshal's letter and the declarations it contained were returned to Longwood. The emperor forbade that anything be signed other than the declaration he had dictated himself to the Grand Marshal. Not only did the governor write that we had to sign the declaration, as he had worded it, but he came himself to Longwood, accompanied by a few officers of his staff, to declare that these gentlemen, and to us, whom he gathered together in the duty officer's office, that if the declaration was not signed that same day, he would issue orders that within 24 hours we should all be sent out to the Cape. There was great anguish, and the Grand Marshal tried every possible line of reasoning with the governor without success. The latter even thought he was being obliging by granting the request to let the emperor choose the personnel who had to leave his service. The governor particularly wanted Countess Casas and Captain Piantovsky to leave the island, as he claimed that both were trying to establish illegal communications. But when the Grand Marshal pointed out to him that the minister's orders mentioned 3 servants and 1 officer, he agreed to let the individuals be designated by the emperor. In the event of a refusal to sign, only the Grand Marshal, and this temporarily, out of consideration for the Countess's pregnancy, would remain with the emperor. I was also designated to remain, as well as a few other servants necessary for the most simple services. The emperor remained in his room, sad and preoccupied, pretending a calm he did not feel. For everyone, there was no doubt that the governor's words would be carried out. We therefore awaited the emperor's decision, convinced it would in all manners be in accordance with honor and duty. When the Grand Marshal let us know what they had decided and the reasons for it, he told us that the title of general given the emperor, under which we were to affix our signatures, could in no way modify our unchangeable devotion. The emperor was, for us, as for history, still the emperor. In view of our oppression, it was necessary to disobey his orders in order to remain with him, without thinking we were lacking in respect, and signed the declaration presented to us. Therefore, we all signed except for Santini, who did not want to sign except with the title of the Emperor Napoleon. As for us, we were happy to escape the peril threatening us, and to be free of the distressing feelings we had lived with for some days. When the emperor learned we had signed the declaration that was asked of us, he said nothing of our disobedience to his orders, understanding the feeling that had motivated it. What would our role have been when we arrived in Europe if, obeying his wish and refusing to accept Napoleon Bonaparte, we had taken away from him the emperor and transported to the Cape of Good Hope, leaving him in complete isolation? We would have been criticized by everyone, and they would have said, in such a case, disobedience to the emperor's orders was mandatory. You demonstrated a lack of courage. You are despicable people. The emperor understood the sentiments that moved us one and all, and saw in them new proof of our devotion. However, he dictated the following note to Count Monson in form of a protest. It has come to my attention that in the conversation which took place between General Lowe and several of these gentlemen, certain things were said about my position that are not in conformity with my beliefs. I abdicated into the hands of the nation, and in favor of my son, I trustfully gave myself up to England in order to live there or in America in the most complete retirement under the name of a colonel killed at my side, fully resolved to remain foreign to all political affairs of any kind. Once I arrived on board the Northumberland, I was told I was a prisoner of war. I was being transported south of the equator, and I was to be called General Bonaparte. I made a point of wearing my title of Emperor Napoleon by opposition to the title of General Bonaparte they wished to impose on me. About 7 or 8 months ago, Count de Moncelon proposed to take care of some small problems that continually arose by my adopting an ordinary name. The Admiral saw fit to write to London about it, and matters remained there. I am today given a name that has the advantage of not prejudging the past, but that does not agree with proper social forms. I am still ready to adopt a name that will enter into ordinary usage, and I repeat that when they decide to put an end to this cruel stay, I fully intend to remain a stranger to any form of politics going on in the world. Such is my way of thinking. Anything said otherwise is not so. Finally, this man, Sir Hudson Lowe, whose sleep was tormented by the anticipation of the emperor's escape and whose waking hours were spent devising ways to torture his victim, established restrictions that for him had become a monomania. In the midst of the events that I have just recounted, which lasted approximately 2 weeks, he found the time to send Count Bertrand on October 9th the document that follows. Text of proposed changes in the rules established for the Longwood prisoners. Article 1. Longwood, with the road to Hut's Gate, along the mountain up the signal post near Alarm House, shall be established as the boundary. Article 2. Sentries shall mark the limits which no one may cross to approach Longwood or its garden without the governor's permission. Article 3. The road of the left of Hut's Gate that goes via Woodridge back to Longwood, having never been frequented by General Bonaparte since the arrival of the governor, will have its outposts largely eliminated. However, any time he wishes to go on horseback in that direction, by informing the officer in time, he will not encounter any obstacle. Article 4. If General Bonaparte wishes to extend his travel in some other direction, an officer from the governor's staff, if he is informed in time, shall be ready to accompany him. If time does not permit it, then the duty officer at Longwood will replace him. The officer watching him is ordered not to approach him unless this is required, and never to provide surveillance except for service reasons. That is, to watch over anything in his travels which deviates from the established rules, and to respectfully inform him of such deviation. Article 5. The regulations already in force preventing communication with any person without the governor's permission must be strictly adhered to. Consequently, it is required that General Bonaparte abstain from entering any house or engaging in conversation with persons he may encounter, except to respond to salutations and ordinary polite comments made to him, unless in the presence of a British officer. Article 6. Persons who, with General Bonaparte's consent, may still receive permission to visit him, may not, in spite of this permission, communicate with any other person of his retinue, unless this is specifically expressed in the authorization. Article 7. At sunset, the garden enclosure around Longwood shall be regarded as the limits. At that time, sentries shall be placed around it, but in such a way as to not bother General Bonaparte by watching him if he wants to continue strolling in the garden. At nightfall, the sentries shall be stationed touching the house, as it was done previously, and access to the house shall be forbidden until the sentries are removed the next morning from the house and garden. Article 8. Any letter for Longwood shall be placed by the governor in a sealed envelope and sent to the duty officer to be delivered sealed to the officer in General Bonaparte's retinue to whom it is addressed. who will in this fashion be assured that no one except the governor knows of its contents. Article 9. No letter may be written or sent. No communication of any kind may be made, except in the manner prescribed above. There can be no correspondence within the island, except for mandatory communications with the supplier. The notes containing these must be submitted open to the duty officer, who shall be in charge of delivering them. The instructions shall take effect on the 10th of the month. Hudson Lowe, St. Helena, October 9th, 1816. The anger occasioned by reading such a document requires no comment. Was it necessary to send to a rock 600 leagues from every continent and 2,000 leagues from Europe the man who, trusting so blindly in British faith, had come to sit by the hearth of this great nation? It was under these restrictions that the emperor had to live until the day death delivered him. The choice of the people who were to leave St. Helena could only fall on those whose services were the least necessary to the emperor. They were Santini, keeper of the portfolio; Rousseau, in charge of the silver; the younger Archambault, second groom; and Captain Piantovsky. The governor had informed them the day before they would leave for the Cape on the 17th. If this departure affected the entire colony, it did, even more so, those who henceforth would live far from the affections to which they had dedicated their lives. What joy would returning to Europe bring them? Would it not be poisoned by the thought of knowing the emperor to be in the claws of the monster guarding him? Each day, Santini's fury against the governor took on a more dangerous character. His compatriot Cipriani was often forced to restrain him so he would not commit a crime. He had confided in him the idea of waiting for the governor in the woods and ridding the emperor of that miserable man by shooting him with his rifle. Cipriani, unable to calm the man he knew well, warned the emperor so he would reason with him about his fury. The emperor summoned Santini immediately and said to him, "Come, you rascal. You want to kill the governor? Don't you realize that I would be accused of having ordered you to do so? Shame on you, committing murder. I forbid you to think about such a thing in the future. If it enters your mind again, I will have you leave the island." All the emperor's words were spoken in Corsican. Santini replied in the same language that it was vengeance and not murder. "Well, then," said the emperor as he stood up from the settee on which he was sitting, "if it is vengeance, I forbid you to carry it out." Santini left, promising not to think about it anymore. But the emperor told me to urge Cipriani to frequently impress on Santini that such a crime must not be committed. Santini had served in the Corsican Legion commanded by Colonel Dornano. He had left there to become a staff runner in the postal system. He was at Fontainebleau in that capacity when the general abdicated in 1814. Presented to Grand Marshal Bertrand by General Ornano, he received permission to come to Elba and was employed there as keeper of the portfolio. He continued in this post during the 100 days and as such came to St. Helena. His duties became negligible. He served the meals and he spent his mornings hunting. Intelligent, he was quite ingenious at making the emperor a suit, flannel shirts, and even shoes. He would cut the emperor's hair and reshape his hat when the need arose. All these odds and ends were not enough to keep him busy. He often spoke to Cipriani of his wish to return to Europe to inform the world, he said, of the harsh treatment the emperor was subjected to. The emperor was aware of Santini's frame of mind and sure of his discretion. The moment had arrived to put it to the test. He summoned him, talked to him at length of what he would say to his family, and gave him a copy written on silk of the protest dictated on August 16th to Count de Montauban to make it known when he arrived in Europe if it succeeded in escaping the search of Sir Hudson Lowe's agents. The emperor dismissed him, assuring him his family would take care of him. Rousseau had gone to Elba in charge of the silverware and was in St. Helena in that same capacity. He could easily be replaced in his duties, but his departure meant the loss of a man as devoted as the others. Such was not the case with the younger Archambault. The two brothers had been driving the emperor's carriage, and their position was important in the stables. Additionally, the emperor found it barbaric to separate two brothers who had devoted their existence to his service. Each of us felt the cruelty in that separation, and in order to avoid it, the Grand Marshal submitted the name of a certain Bernard, a servant of his own. The emperor submitted the name of Gentilini, equally easy to replace in his service. The governor replied to those requests that Bernard was Flemish and Gentilini Italian. His instructions called for 3 French servants. He even added, and this comment was reported to the emperor, that had Santini not refused to sign the declaration, he would not have accepted him among those departing because he was Corsican. The emperor, for whom the finest title was that of being French, smiled with pity at this impertinence that could only issue from a sick mind or a perverse soul. All attempts were fruitless, and the two brothers had to be separated. Count Piątkowski, who was led by pure devotion to follow the emperor to Elba and then to St. Helena, did not spend enough time with the emperor for his departure to be a great loss to him. All four of them were therefore ready to leave. On October 18th, before they left, the emperor, although suffering from a lung infection, had all three of them come to his bedroom, thanked them for their good service and their devotion, and wished them happiness. All three were deeply moved and could not answer when they left, except with tears. They carried with them certificates mentioning their services and an invitation to the princes of his family to pay them each a lifetime pension equal to 1/3 of their salary. He kept Santini a few minutes longer. He then called for Captain Piątkowski, thanked him for the sentiments that had led him to come to share his exile, and told him that be it in France, America, or Rome, he could always use the emperor's name as a recommendation to his friends and family. He carried with him a most honorable certificate recommending him to the imperial family. All four received as a traveling allowance 1 year's wages or salary. Having gone on board the same day, they were subjected to a very thorough search. It was taken as far as possible with Santini and Captain Piątkowski, upon whom nothing suspicious was found. At 5 p.m., the same day, they left the harbor, heading out for the Cape of Good Hope. The elder Archambault came back from town, overcome with sorrow. It was pointed out to him that his brother was far less happy than he, since, too, the pain of separation was that of leaving the emperor. The emperor's health was altered by all these harassments, having their origin in Plantation House. Since the addition of the further restrictions, he no longer left the Longwood Plateau and no longer received anyone, and that was one less distraction for him. Dr. Mira and General Gourgaud, who rode every day on horseback, were the only people who brought him any news. Admiral Malcolm was at the Cape. Before leaving the island, he had expressed to the emperor his regrets that he was leaving him on such bad terms with the governor. But the emperor had replied that as long as things were not returned to the earlier status, he would agree to no compromise whatsoever. For several days, the emperor had been suffering from a chest inflammation, and he was waiting for it to subside before having a tooth pulled that he assumed to be bad. The doctor told him it was not, but that was the way it was moving. There was one reason to believe the root was dead. He could keep it, but it would not be of great use to him. In that case, he replied, if I'm no longer to expect it to serve me, and as it hurts, I would just as soon have you pull it. Dr. Miro went to get his instrument, and the emperor sat down in the armchair, and the doctor removed the tooth with such ease that the emperor said to him, is that not all? At one point, I thought you'd missed it altogether. On seeing the tooth, they greatly regretted having felt obliged to pull it because it was not spoiled at all. A severe headache followed this excretion, but a foot bath taken during the night made it disappear.